In the small village of Greenhill, where the dusty red earth stuck to your feet and the evenings were filled with the sound of frogs singing in the nearby stream, there lived a poor boy named David. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were humble farmers who worked from sunrise to sunset, their hands hardened by years of tilling the soil. They owned no gold or silver, just a small hut, a few goats, and the hope that their eldest son would one day bring them a better life. Life in Greenhill was simple but hard. David rose early every morning to help his father plant yams, carry baskets of cassava, and feed the chickens. He was a bright and obedient boy, but the village offered him little opportunity beyond farming. His parents dreamed that one day he would learn a trade, move to the city, and send money home to build a bigger house and send his younger siblings to school. One evening, the village buzzed with excitement because Uncle Samuel had returned from Lagos. He arrived wearing a fine shirt that shimmered in the sunlight, dark sunglasses that stayed on his face even indoors, and shoes so polished you could almost see a reflection in them. The children followed him around, fascinated, as he walked with an air of someone important. That night, after dinner, Uncle Samuel spoke about Lagos with the kind of pride that made people lean forward to listen. He spoke of roads so busy they never rested, of markets so large you could get lost in them for hours, and of money flowing everywhere if you had the sense to work hard. Then, he looked at Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and said, "Send David with me to Lagos. I will place him with a trader. He will learn a business, and in a few years, he will come back a big man." David's parents exchanged a long, silent look. They knew life in the city could be hard, but they also knew it was a chance for their son to escape the limits of the village. The next morning, the decision was made. Mrs. Thompson packed David's small bag with 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, a wrapper, and a small Bible. She wrapped roasted yam and groundnut paste in banana leaves for his journey. His father placed his rough hands on David's shoulders and said, "My son, Lagos is not like here. Be patient, be humble, and never forget where you come from." The journey to Lagos was like a dream. The bus rumbled along dusty roads, stopping at small towns where hawkers thrust roasted corn, puff-puff, and chilled sachets of water through the windows. David stared out at the passing scenes, fields fading into towns, towns melting into a sea of buildings. By the time they arrived, Lagos was alive with noise and color. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, petrol fumes, and the salty scent of the sea. Cars honked endlessly, voices shouted over each other, and people moved like a river that never stopped flowing. Uncle Samuel took David to Balagan Market, a place so full of life it felt like the ground itself was vibrating. He introduced David to his new master, Mr. Johnson, a tall man with a sharp gaze and a voice that could cut through the chaos of the market. Mr. Johnson sold colorful fabrics, each one more dazzling than the next, and his stall was always surrounded by customers. From the very first day, David learned that Lagos life was not the paradise he had imagined. He was woken before dawn to fetch water, sweep the shop, and wash his master's car before the market opened. During the day, he stood under the blazing sun, carrying heavy loads, calling out to customers, and running errands through the crowded streets. At night, he slept on a thin mat in the corner of the shop, listening to the never-ending noise of the city. Mr. Johnson rarely praised him. If David worked too slowly, he would shout. If David made a small mistake with change, he would be scolded in front of customers. Sometimes, Mr. Johnson would smile warmly at buyers, but as soon as they left, his face would turn hard again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The village felt far away, like a dream David had once had but could no longer touch. Still, David worked. He carried bolts of fabric so heavy his arms ached, fetched water from far-off taps when the one nearby ran dry, and endured insults from Mr. Johnson's friends, who called him Village Boy, as if it were his name. At night, when he lay awake, he thought of his parents and the promise in his father's voice. He told himself over and over, "Be patient, be humble, learn well." One hot afternoon, a wealthy woman stepped into the shop looking for a rare fabric for her daughter's wedding. Mr. Johnson, seeing an opportunity, told her they didn't have it in stock, planning to buy it later and sell it to her at a higher price. But David knew exactly where the fabric could be found, 2 stalls away, with a supplier who still had a few rolls left. Quietly, he told the woman. She looked at him in surprise, then asked him to take her there. David led her through the crowd, bargained for a fair price, and carried the fabric to her car. Before she left, she pressed a folded note into his palm, Nigerian Naira 5,000. David had never held so much money in his life. When Mr. Johnson heard about it, he was furious. "So, you are now doing business behind my back? You think you're smart?" From that day on, the punishments grew harsher. Some nights David went to bed hungry because his master refused to share food. Other days, he was made to stand all day in the heat without rest. But instead of breaking, David began to learn. He observed how other traders greeted customers, how they joked to win trust, how they persuaded people to buy. He memorized prices, suppliers' names, and the little secrets of bargaining. He listened more than he spoke, and slowly, he began to understand the rhythm of the market. When Mr. Johnson traveled to Ibadan for a week, David was left in charge of the stall. He threw himself into the work, selling with energy, treating customers with respect, and keeping careful records. By the end of the week, he had made more sales than the shop usually did in a month. Customers began asking for him even after Mr. Johnson returned. But instead of being proud, Mr. Johnson became colder. "Don't think you own the shop," he said one evening. "You are here because I allow it." David kept his head bowed, but deep inside, he knew he was building something that no one could take away. Months passed, and David kept saving small amounts of money from tips and side errands. It was slow work, but it was something. Then one rainy season, something happened that almost made David give up Legos completely. The rainy season came suddenly, as if the sky had been holding its breath for months and finally decided to let it all out at once. Heavy clouds gathered, turning the afternoon into something that felt like night, and then the rain began to fall. Thick, pounding drops that hammered on rooftops, splashed into gutters, and flooded the narrow streets of Balagan Market. David had always known Lagos rain could be fierce, but he had never seen it like this. The market became chaos. Traders scrambled to cover their goods with plastic sheets, shouting for customers to step away from the water. The gutters overflowed, carrying everything from plastic bottles to stray sandals. Some parts of the market became small rivers, and people had to roll up their trousers to wade through. Mr. Johnson was in a foul mood that day. The rain meant fewer customers, and fewer customers meant less money. He stood inside the shop, arms folded, watching the rain like it had insulted him personally. "David," he said suddenly, "go to Warehouse Street and bring the 2 rolls of lace I ordered. The supplier is waiting." David hesitated. Warehouse Street was a good distance away, and by now the rain had turned the road into a fast-moving stream of brown water. "Sir," he said carefully, "the rain is heavy. Did I ask you about the rain?" Mr. Johnson barked, "Go, or don't come back." With no choice, David pulled a torn nylon bag over his head and stepped out into the storm. The cold water quickly soaked his trousers. Cars splashed him as they passed, and his sandals squelched with each step. By the time he reached Warehouse Street, the supplier was already closing up, annoyed that David had taken so long. He handed over the 2 rolls of lace, each one heavy and awkward to carry. The journey back was worse. The water was now up to David's knees in some places. Twice, he nearly lost his balance as the current pushed against him. When he finally reached the market, shivering and dripping, Mr. Johnson looked at him and said, "What took you so long? You village boys don't know how to move fast." He didn't even thank him. That night, as David tried to wring the water from his clothes before sleeping on his mat, his body ached all over. His feet were sore, his hands were blistered from carrying the rolls of lace, and his stomach was empty. For the first time since he came to Lagos, he thought about running away. He imagined finding a bus back to Greenhill, walking into his parents' hut, and never seeing Balagan Market again. But as he lay there, listening to the rain on the roof, he remembered his father's voice. "Be patient, be humble, and learn well." He clenched his fists. No, he would not go back empty-handed. If Lagos was a test, then he would pass it. The next morning, he woke earlier than usual and started working before Mr. Johnson even arrived. He greeted customers with a smile, offered them seats, and spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his trade. He began to build a reputation for being trustworthy and fair. Other traders in the market started to notice him. Some would call him to help with their customers, and in return, they would slip him small coins or give him leftover food. It was during this time that he met Mr. Williams, an older trader who sold imported fabrics a few stalls away. Mr. Williams liked David's honesty and often asked him to help in his stall when it got busy. One day, as David was helping him load goods into a customer's car, Mr. Williams said quietly, "Boy, you work harder than most apprentices I've seen. When you finish your years with that man, come and see me. I can help you start something of your own." Those words became like a light in David's heart. He held on to them through the long days and sleepless nights, through the times when Mr. Johnson's voice rang in his ears like a whip. He started to save more seriously now, hiding his small earnings in a tin box beneath his mat. But just when it seemed like things were getting better, something happened that almost destroyed everything he had worked for. It was a Saturday, the busiest day in the market. Customers crowded the stall, buying fabrics for weddings, parties, and church events. David was everywhere at once, folding cloth, measuring yards, collecting payments. In the middle of the rush, a woman in a bright yellow dress bought 3 rolls of fabric and paid with a thick bundle of cash. David placed it in the drawer as usual and went back to serving another customer. An hour later, when Mr. Johnson checked the drawer, the money was gone. His eyes narrowed, and he turned to David. "Where is the 150,000 Nigerian nairas from that sale?" David's stomach dropped. "I put it in the drawer." "Don't lie to me," Mr. Johnson roared, his voice carrying across the market. "You think I don't know you? I've been watching you since you came from your village. Today, you have shown your true color." Before David could say another word, Mr. Johnson slapped him hard across the face. Heads turned. Other traders came to see what was happening. Some murmured in disbelief. Others just shook their heads. David's cheeks burned, not just from the slap, but from the shame of being accused in front of everyone. He tried to explain, but Mr. Johnson wouldn't listen. That night, David lay on his mat, unable to sleep. His mind kept replaying the scene over and over. He knew he hadn't stolen the money, but proving it would be impossible. If Mr. Johnson decided to send him away, his years in Lagos would be wasted. What David didn't know was that the truth about the missing money was about to come out in a way that would change his life forever. The night after the accusation, David could hardly close his eyes. The market had gone silent, but inside him there was only noise. Echoes of Mr. Johnson's shout, the sting of the slap, the murmurs of the traders who had seen it all. He had never felt so small. The thin mat beneath him felt like stone, and even the rain that tapped on the corrugated roof above could not wash away the heaviness in his chest. The next morning, Mr. Johnson barely looked at him. His voice, when it came, was cold and sharp. "From today, you will no longer touch the money. You will stay outside and call customers. I cannot trust a thief with my sales." The words pierced David more deeply than any slap could. Thief. The label stuck to him like mud. The other apprentices in nearby stalls began to treat him differently. Some laughed quietly when he passed, whispering to each other. Others avoided him entirely, as though the accusation had turned him into something contagious. Even the customers seemed to look at him differently, less warmth, more suspicion. David swallowed his pride and kept working. If there was one thing he had learned in Lagos, it was that the city didn't pause for your pain. Days passed like this, each one longer than the last. The shame followed him everywhere. At night, as he lay in the dark, he thought of his parents in Greenhill, how proud they had been to send him away. The thought of them hearing that he had been called a thief was almost unbearable. He wished he could run to them, fall at their feet, and tell them everything, but he also knew he could not return empty-handed. Then, one quiet afternoon when the rain had chased most customers away, the truth began to unfold. Mr. Johnson had gone to a meeting, leaving David to sweep the shop. He was bending to pick up scraps of fabric when he heard voices just outside, Low, hurried whispers. He recognized the voice of Peter, the older apprentice from the next stall over, talking to someone. "I told you I'd pay you back," Peter was saying. "That money from the yellow dress woman covered my debt." Johnson blamed the village boy. "Easy." David froze. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. The missing money. Peter had taken it. His mind raced. Should he run outside and confront him? Should he tell Mr. Johnson? But another thought stopped him cold. Peter was known for his temper and his friends in the market. If David accused him without proof, Peter could make his life even worse. That night, David didn't sleep again. He lay in the darkness, listening to the rats scurry across the ceiling, thinking of what to do. If he stayed silent, everyone would go on believing he was a thief. If he spoke up without evidence, no one would believe him. And somewhere deep inside, a darker thought began to whisper. Maybe Lagos wasn't meant for him after all. Maybe he should leave. The next few days were a blur. The rain fell almost every afternoon now, and the streets outside the market smelled of damp cloth and mud. David's clothes were always wet, his feet always cold. Every time he passed Peter in the market, Peter gave him a smirk that made his stomach twist. One evening, just as David was about to close the shop, Mr. Williams from a few stalls down came by. He handed David a small plastic bag with bread and fried fish. "You look tired, boy. Eat something," he said. David managed a weak smile, but inside, he was fighting back tears. He wanted to tell Mr. Williams everything, but the words wouldn't come. That night, he sat on his mat staring at the bread and fish. The rain outside grew heavier, and the wind rattled the tin roof. Somewhere in the market, a stall door banged against its hinges. David felt the weight of the city pressing on him, the unfairness of it all, the loneliness. He whispered into the dark, "God, if you can hear me, help me. I can't do this anymore." And it was in that same dark, with the rain falling and the city sleeping, that an idea came to him, one that could clear his name, but also risk everything. He would need to be patient, careful, and brave. And if it failed, he knew there would be no second chance. What David didn't yet know was that in just a few days, that plan would pull him into a moment so tense, so dangerous, that it would decide whether he would rise in Lagos or disappear from it entirely. The days that followed were slow, heavy with the weight of what David intended to do. He kept his head down, working as though nothing had changed, watching Peter from a distance, memorizing his movements. He noticed that Peter often lingered around Mr. Johnson's stall when no one was looking, pretending to chat with other traders while his eyes flicked toward the cash drawer. One Saturday, when the market was busy again, David saw his chance. Mr. Johnson was away at a supplier's shop, and David was manning the stall with Peter hanging nearby. A woman came in and bought a large amount of fabric, paying with a thick bundle of cash. David counted it in full view, calling out the amount loudly so nearby traders could hear. Then, instead of putting it in the drawer, he slipped it into a small envelope and tucked it under the counter. He stepped outside to call to another customer, keeping one eye on the shop. Peter waited only a few moments before drifting casually inside. His hand slid under the counter where he thought the money had been placed, but instead of finding cash, his fingers closed on nothing. He looked around quickly, confusion flashing across his face, then froze as a voice behind him said, "Looking for something, Peter?" It was Mr. Williams. Unknown to Peter, David had told him everything and asked for help. Mr. Williams had been watching from across the aisle, waiting for the moment. Other traders turned to look, curious. David walked back in, his heart pounding. "This is the man who took the money that day," he said, his voice steady but loud enough for the nearby stalls to hear. Peter tried to deny it, but Mr. Williams reminded everyone how he had seen Peter slipping away with the yellow dress woman's cash weeks ago. The whispers in the market grew, and Peter's face turned pale. He knew the market's code. Once your reputation was gone, you were finished. Without another word, he pushed past the crowd and disappeared down the street, not looking back. Mr. Johnson stood in the doorway, having returned just in time to hear the last part. He looked at David for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "It seems I owe you an apology." but his voice was stiff, and there was no warmth in it. David simply nodded. He had not done this for Mr. Johnson's respect. He had done it to get his dignity back. Life went on, and though Mr. Johnson was no kinder than before, the shadow of suspicion had lifted. Other traders greeted David warmly again, and some even sent customers his way when they were too busy. Eventually, his apprenticeship ended. With the small savings he had hidden away and the help of Mr. Williams, who lent him a little more, David opened his own tiny stall, just one table and a few bolts of fabric. It was modest, but it was his. And slowly it grew. Years later, when he returned to Greenhill to visit his parents, he came back not as the poor boy who had left, but as a young man who had endured the fire and come out stronger. The villagers gathered to hear his story, and when he finished, he told them the lesson he had learned in Lagos. Truth may be buried by lies, but it will always find a way to rise. Patience is not weakness, and suffering can be the tool that shapes you into the person you were meant to be. Never let the world's cruelty make you abandon your integrity, because in the end, that is the only wealth no one can steal from you. And from that day, the story of David, the boy who went to Lagos and came back with honor, was told around firesides as a reminder to the young. Asterisk, asterisk, that honesty and perseverance can carry you through even the deepest waters. Asterisk, asterisk.